Broken and Fixed, Our Story. A student production by Melina and Pam. Over a certain period of time, some conflicts happened that changed our history. This is the 1800s. This was a period of time when the North and the South had many problems, such as land differences, climate, and problems socially. These problems led the fight to be able to be compared to a sibling fight. The fight got so bad that it was a war. The sibling fight took several years. It showed how stubborn and persistent the North and South were and what their other problems were. As stated previously, the North and South had many geographical differences. The differences are that the North had mild summers and harsh winters, and the South had hot summers and mild winters. The South, however, had a lot of flat land where they grew lots of cotton and other crops. This was their agriculture and what they relied on. Other than that, cotton and other crops. Other than that, farm owners didn't work in fields. Slaves did. Unlike the South, the North had bumpy and hilly land. Northerners were more concerned with their factories. The Industrial Revolution had started in the North too. This was just one more reason for being like siblings in a fight. Also, the South relied on the North's industrial products. This made them jealous because the North had so many advantages, plus a huge successful industry. Slavery was the one big difference between the North and the South. Slavery took place mostly in the South. It also took place in a few northern states. Even though slavery was in some parts of the North, it was still a big difference. The life of a slave was very gruesome. They worked almost all day, every day. Life wasn't easy. Families were separated, children were forced to work, and if you were a slave, you got whipped. There was no winning of this battle, or the battle of the siblings. The differences between the North and the South separated them very quickly. This called for some compromises. There were 4 main compromises. In between those 4 main compromises, there were many more. The first compromise was the Missouri Compromise. This gave Missouri to the South, Maine went to the North, and under Missouri there was an invisible line that above would be free, except for Missouri. Below that line, the states would be enslaved. The next compromise was in 1850. California would be a free state. New Mexico and Utah were open to slavery. There was no slave trade in D.C. and a strong fugitive slave law. The Dred Scott case was next and was in 1857. It declared that African Americans are not citizens. Once someone is a slave, they will remain a slave, even if they escape, and that Congress couldn't ban slavery. In 1861, the secession happened. There was a big downfall. There was no compromise. This messed everything up and made the sibling fight even worse. In the 1860s, the North and South would divide even more than they already did. In January 1861, the South secedes. The South had a convention and decided to let South Carolina secede. Then the South decided to create a government. These 2 main things made the North go haywire. There were more things that eventually led to the attack at Fort Sumter. Abraham Lincoln was trying to send supplies to Fort Sumter. He heard that the South was trying to get Robert Anderson to surrender. Anderson would, if he could, get his supplies. The South refused his offer and left. On April 12, 1861, the Civil War had started. Shots were fired at the fort. The next battle was the First Battle of Bull Run. The public demanded that the chief, who was Winfield Scott, send out his army. He sent out his unprepared and not completely trained troops. The general was then replaced. General McDowell was replaced by General George B. McClellan. The next major battle was the Battle of the Monitor and the Merrimack in March 1862. The South wanted to attempt to reduce the North's advantage. Because the South wanted to do that, there were many more battles. As you know, The North and South are the complete opposite of each other. Their opinions and views are exactly the opposite of each other. The North was very happy because it had all these advantages over the South. They had more soldiers, more telegraphs, and trains. These all helped. The disadvantages were that the war was in the South. They didn't know that territory. The South had a lot of disadvantages. They didn't have high-tech operations or a lot of soldiers. The only advantage was it was in their territory, so they knew where they were going and where to hide. The Civil War was very deadly. It killed 600,000 people from both sides. It was so deadly because of the new weapons and the old battle tactics. Even though it was in the Southern Territory, the South still lost. After the Civil War, America was being reconstructed. Many things were destroyed, so this was when everything started to get fixed. States were becoming the way they used to be. For African Americans, there was a renewal of hope. They would be able to be more social. Africans could possibly go to school, too. All women were taught how to cook, take care of people, and learned housekeeping. Even though the Civil War was tragic, it meant a new start for everyone. After the Civil War, the North and South started to become one country. The U.S. was getting fixed. The Civil War led to new technology. The Civil War also led to more rights for everyone. Slaves were eventually freed in 1863 by the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln decided to abolish slavery because it would be a wake-up call to the South. After the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves were then later given rights by the Civil Rights Movement. This was about 100 years later. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for those rights. After several years, the Civil War finally came to an end in 1865. This meant that the U.S. would now become one country. There were so many things that all led up to one conclusion, that all the time it seemed like a sibling fight. It was able to be compared to a sibling fight because they were both from the same country. It's the same thing as being from the same parents. Also, they both were stubborn and persistent. This was another reason the whole time it was like a brother and sister fighting.